Welcome to the Private School Leader Podcast, where private school leaders learn how to thrive and not just survive as they serve and lead their schools. I strongly believe that it is possible to have a long and happy and fulfilling career as a private school leader, and my passion is to help you figure out exactly how to do just that right here on the Private School Leader Podcast. And I'm your host, Mark Minkus. So on June 21st, 1985, a domestic flight in Norway, the Braathens SAFE Flight 139, was hijacked mid-flight. And this was a Boeing 737 carrying 121 people, 116 passengers, and 5 crew. So this flight in Norway, June 1985, mid-air, flight is hijacked. And the hijacker had an airsoft gun, like what we would call today, like a paint gun. And the gun looked real, and he also claimed that he had planted explosives on board. And so rerouted the plane, had it land at a different airport than its destination, and his demands were to speak to the Prime Minister of Norway and the Minister of Justice of Norway. But this story has a happy ending because everyone remained calm, and the incident ended with 0 injuries, 0 fatalities. All 121 people on board were safe, and even the hijacker was arrested and was not injured. And this, according to the investigation, the public report that was put out there, they said that the reason that this resolution came about was because of, quote, calm, competent handling by the crew and authorities, safe negotiation, reliance on procedures, and not panic or emotional overreaction. And so this hijacking stands out because, when things go wrong in us, we feel that fear spike and the danger. It just causes our fight or flight response to kick in. And that's when we need to have calm leadership. And that's when we need to follow our systems and have self-control. Now, here's the thing, like what we deal with every day as private school leaders is not on the same stakes as a hijacked plane 25,000 feet in the air, but the principle is the same, because when it comes to parents, sometimes parents hijack our emotions, and it could happen when they walk in the front door of the school, or you get that email that has some capital letters and an exclamation point on the subject line, or you're in carpool and the parent puts down their window and starts talking, and maybe you're at the basketball game and they come and sit next to you on the bleachers, and you're like, well, here we go. And I don't know about you, but my heart rate goes up, my body tenses, my brain feels a little bit like foggy. I get a little weird feeling in my stomach, and that's because my emotions just got hijacked. And so on today's episode of the Private School Leader Podcast, I'm going to try to persuade you to do these 3 things when a parent hijacks your emotions. So speaking of parents, I want to ask you a question. What is the name of your most difficult parent right now? What's the name of your most difficult parent right now? Well, that name can cause a reaction inside your body. That's what we're talking about on today's episode. And I used to get super anxious and stressed out and had ulcers, and a lot of that had to do with parents and my emotional reaction to the way they were behaving. Well, that's why I created Parent Academy, and I want to teach you how to work with private school parents so that you have less stress and more confidence, less anxiety and more calm. And in the first 4 modules, I teach you step-by-step framework for how to build better relationships with private school parents with less stress and less anxiety. And so the privateschoolleader.com/Parent Academy is where you can find out more information. And I really, really believe, and I've seen it from almost 100 private school leaders now that have purchased Parent Academy, seen the difference for them, and I want to teach you the same thing. So privateschoolleader.com/parent academy. And then I wanted to mention that I also have one coaching spot open right now, and I would love to work with you one-on-one. So just shoot me an email at mark.o.minkus@gmail.com if you would like more information, and we'll just jump on a free 20-minute Zoom call. And I want to hear more about your biggest struggle or your biggest goal. So one coaching spot open. Shoot me an email, mark.o.minkus@gmail.com, and just say, tell me more. And then finally, I want to give you a resource because we are talking about parents. This is a free resource called 7 Steps to Having Successful Meetings with Upset Parents. And this is an 11-page PDF that gives you a step-by-step plan to have better meetings with an upset parent at your school. And so I really believe that every good coach has a game plan, every good teacher has a lesson plan, but too many of us as private school leaders don't have a plan when we sit down to talk with an upset parent. Well, now you have a plan, and you can grab this free guide at theprivateschoolleader.com/meeting. That's the 7 steps to having successful meetings with upset parents. Just go to theprivateschoolleader.com/meeting and grab it for free. So on today's episode, we're going to break this down into 3 sections. First of all, I'm going to just quickly talk about what is amygdala hijack, because we've talked about that before. The second section is I want to give you 5 things that happen when you allow a parent to hijack your emotions, and then finally give you 3 strategies to regain control of your emotions. So what is amygdala hijack? So inside your brain, you have this little almond-shaped structure that's called the amygdala. And our amygdala is like our early warning system. And it's always on the lookout for threats. It's almost like when you watch a movie and, Top Gun Maverick came out a couple years ago, and I just really love that movie. And there's a couple of scenes where there's radar, and the radar is constantly on, and then there's a beep. And it's a couple of enemy aircraft that are coming into the airspace. It's that early warning system to detect the threat. That's what your amygdala is. And when our amygdala senses danger, whether it's physical danger or emotional danger, just think about it as your amygdala is like this stick figure that just pounds this big red button, okay? And then it releases cortisol, it releases adrenaline, your blood flows to your extremities and away from your vital organs. There's all of these things that happen during fight or flight. And that's great when a bear is chasing you in the woods, but it's not so great when a parent is sitting across from you and they're really upset about a dress code violation that their kid got, okay? And fight or flight is great for physical threats, but it's terrible for psychological threats or existential threats. And almost all of the things as private school leaders that cause our fight or flight to activate, cause our amygdala to hijack our emotions, most of them are psychological or existential threats. They're not physical threats. And so the amygdala, the hijack that happens, just like that hijacker on that plane in Norway in 1985, he took over the plane. He pulled out a gun that looked real. He said he had explosives. And so the pilot, the crew, they're like, okay, we're going to do what you say. And he hijacked that plane. Well, the amygdala hijacks the prefrontal cortex. And you know that your prefrontal cortex is where your logical thinking happens and your decision-making happens. And so you want your locus of control to be in the prefrontal cortex when you're meeting with an upset parent. But many times that little almond-shaped thing in your brain hijacks your emotions and throws your locus of control into the amygdala, into the emotional part of your brain. And then we don't listen as well. We want to get out of there. It's like we want to flee the situation. Sometimes our logical thinking just stops. We sometimes say things that we regret, or you just freeze up and you can't find the right words. All of those things happen to me many, many times. Where we want our brains to be when we're having a meeting or having a conversation with an upset parent is in that prefrontal cortex. But I want you to think about it this way. your prefrontal cortex, when the amygdala hijacks it, it basically goes offline. It's sort of like, you know how frustrating it is when you're trying to do some work and then there's no Wi-Fi, there's no internet. Your prefrontal cortex just went offline. And now everything is going to the emotional part of your brain. And this isn't you being weak. This isn't you having a lack of soft skills. This isn't you having a lack of leadership skills. This is the biology in your body that is doing this. And parents don't even hijack your emotions on purpose necessarily. They act in a certain way, and our brain interprets their being intense or their loud voice or their facial expression. Our brain interprets that as danger, and then we start to feel the effects of that cortisol and that adrenaline pumping into our body. So I'm telling you about the biological things that happen in your brain and in your body when an upset parent is in your vicinity, whether that's physical space, through email, or on the phone. And I don't want that to happen to you. I want it to happen less often, and I want you to be able to get back the control of the aircraft, so to speak, that's been hijacked. And we're going to talk about that in a couple of minutes. But first, I want to illuminate for you the 5 things that can happen if you let a parent hijack your emotions. And I just want to lead by saying that all 5 of these things, I've done them. All 5 of these things, they've happened to me, and all 5 of these things, I've regretted them when they did happen. So 5 things that can happen if you let a parent hijack your emotions. Number 1, you give in just to make the discomfort go away. You give in to make it stop. And I think that this is the most frequent outcome. It certainly was for me, but it's also probably one of the most problematic, because when a parent was pressing me, when a parent is raising their voice at you, when they're making an unreasonable demand that is something that is not aligned with our student handbook, and we're emotionally overwhelmed, our brain just wants this meeting to end. And so what I've done, and maybe what you've done, is I just gave in. And I'm like, okay. And I make the exception, or I bend the rule, or I kind of work around the policy or break the policy. I reverse that teacher's decision. I put the kid in the class that he or she didn't qualify for. And then the meeting ends and the parent's happy. And here's the thing. Not only is it a problem because I have to now go talk to my teacher and I feel regret, but what I did that's even worse is that I just validated the parent's curriculum that if they bring the heat, they're going to get what they want. And then here's the other problem. The parent text group, everybody knows everything about everybody in our private schools. And so if I give in on something, you know right well that the other parents in that grade and other parents in the school know about that. So it's not going to cause less people coming with unreasonable requests. It's going to cause more parents coming with unreasonable requests when I just give in to get out of the situation, to end the meeting. And then if you give a mouse a cookie, it wants a glass of milk. And what I've seen is when I give in to that parent, it's not like that parent then goes away and leaves me alone until their kid graduates. Usually the next time it's a more ridiculous request, and they're more upset because they figure that they're going to get their way again because it happened before. And so giving in just to make the meeting stop, to make the discomfort stop, that's what our brain, our emotions are trying to get us to do. The fight or flight is saying, get out of here. There's danger. And that's about the worst thing that we can do. Okay, maybe not the worst thing, because number 2 is you say something that you regret. So if we snap, or if we yell, or if we, kind of lose our cool and we go all in on trying to quote unquote like win the conversation, and we see it as a zero-sum game in order, like a conversation really should be a win-win conversation, and the child is the one who wins because somehow you as the private school leader and the parent have been able to come to a conclusion that the child wins. But when we make a conversation with a parent a zero-sum game, then someone has to win and someone has to lose, and then we're trying to win the conversation. And here's the problem. We can't put that toothpaste back in the tube, and they're going to remember what we said, and they're going to tell other people about what we said and how we said it. So one of the things that can happen if we let parents hijack our emotions is that we say something that we regret. And then number 3, and this has certainly happened to me, is that we get defensive instead of curious. We get defensive instead of curious. And so if I'm grounded, if I'm curious, I'm going to say, well, help me understand that. Or I'm going to say, tell me more about that. But if my emotions have been hijacked and I'm elevated, my autonomic nervous system is dysregulated, I'm going to interrupt that parent and say, well, that's not what happened. And I'm going to get into this back and forth with them, and I'm not going to be curious. I'm going to be defensive. You've done that. I've done that in meetings. We don't want to do that because we know how those meetings go when we interrupt the parent and tell them that they're wrong. Just think about it. When you're having a conversation with your spouse or your partner or your best friend, your sibling, and you're telling them something that matters to you a lot, and they interrupt you and tell you that you're wrong. I mean, that just makes me furious thinking about it. And so we know how well that's going to go when we do that with a parent. The 4th thing that happens when we let parents hijack our emotions is we damage trust with our teachers. So the teachers, we're modeling for them how we handle parents, and they watch it closely. They know the outcomes. And if they see me getting steamrolled, they see me getting manipulated or intimidated or me being a pushover or rolling over, then they're going to lose confidence in me that how am I supposed to protect them, quote unquote, protect them from the parents? How am I supposed to have their backs? And if the reason that a parent is talking to me is because they're upset about something that a teacher did, a grade that they quote unquote gave a kid. We know that kids earn grades, but parents say teachers give grades. And if the teacher, has done a thing and it's a good thing or it's a thing that aligns with the handbook, like they didn't do something wrong, if I don't have that teacher's back, then that teacher, of course, is going to lose confidence in me as the leader. And we're going to lose trust. And when we lose trust, then it impacts morale. It impacts culture. It increases teacher turnover. It creates a culture of fear of parents in our school. And it all kind of can begin with me letting my emotions being hijacked lead me to giving in. And then number 5, what happens when we let emotions get hijacked by parents is that we get exhausted and burn out, because that cortisol, the long-term effect of cortisol and adrenaline in your body is burnout and other things like ulcers, like shingles, like vertigo, like oral neuropathy, like high blood pressure, like stroke-like symptoms. And so there are many, many long-term negative physical and mental health impacts of too much cortisol and too much adrenaline. It takes us a long time to come down from that. You know, that whole tired but wired thing when you're trying to go to bed and you're really tired but you're too wired. That's all that cortisol in your brain and the adrenaline in your body. And then another thing that I would do is I would like ruminate it and ruminate over that thought and replay it in the conversation in my mind. And I should have said this, and then I beat myself up. And I really believe that this is one of the things that is most directly tied to private school leaders burning out. Yeah, we work long hours and yeah, we work really hard, but I think that the emotional price tag attached to these types of stressful conversations puts us on the fast track to burn out even more so than the hours that we work, even more than decision fatigue, even more than dealing with student discipline or dealing with teacher drama. I think a lot of it has to do with the stress from the parents. So I've given you the bad news, but I always try to give you the bad news first and then give you the good news and give you some strategies. So I'm going to keep it simple and just give you 3 strategies to use when a parent hijacks your emotions. So strategy number 1 is to pause and name it. Pause and name it. So I think that pause is one of the most powerful tools that we have to pause. The power of the pause is something you've heard me say before. And there's a famous quote by Viktor Frankl, the author of Man's Search for Meaning, a Holocaust survivor from Auschwitz who later became a very successful psychologist. But he wrote in Man's Search for Meaning, quote, "Between stimulus and response there is a space, and in that space is our power to choose our response." And when he was in the concentration camp at Auschwitz, the thing that he attributes to being able to survive that horrible, horrifying situation was between stimulus and response, there's a space, and in that space is our power to choose our response. His stimulus was his family getting murdered, being starved, hypothermia, being threatened to be killed on a daily basis by the Nazis. That was the stimulus, but what was his response? He chose his response, and he chose to survive. And so there's power in that pause, and even if it's for like 2 seconds or 3 seconds, we could pause and send a message to the brain saying, "I'm safe." Okay? You don't have to say it out loud, but when you feel that change, that click, that shift in your body, when that amygdala activates the fight or flight response, if we pause, take a breath, and say, "I'm safe," to yourself, that can make a tremendous difference in what happens in the next 30 to 60 seconds in your body, okay? And, pausing can help, slow that heart rate down, keep the prefrontal cortex online, our listening gets better, our decision-making gets better, we're more confident. So, again, if we keep the locus of control in that prefrontal cortex, we can have a better meeting. We can have a better conversation. We can make a better decision. We can stick to our school policies. And I said that the number 1 strategy was to pause and name it. Let me tell you what I mean by name it. So you know how I said we pause and we say, "I'm safe"? In that pause, we could also say, "This is amygdala hijack, I'm okay." Like whatever the short little phrase is, when you say "I'm safe," that in your brain could mean, "This is amygdala hijack, I'm okay. This is just my body reacting." However you want to condense that into a phrase or into a word. If you pause and take a breath and say "I'm safe," or say this is hijack, or "I'm okay," it literally sends a message to your amygdala and your fight or flight response, and it keeps the locus of control in the prefrontal cortex. And so when we name it, there's a phrase out there, "name it to tame it," that when we're feeling anxious, if we actually stop and think about and figure out, why am I feeling anxious, and we name it. Okay, I'm anxious. I'm feeling anxious because after school I have a faculty meeting and I have to get up in front of the teachers and tell them something that they're not going to want to hear. When we name it, we can tame it, and then sometimes, actually much of the time, it reduces the emotional power, it reduces the pumping of the cortisol and the adrenaline, because we're telling our brain, we're telling our amygdala that we're okay. It's just trying to keep us safe. It's just trying to keep us to be able to outrun the bear. But we don't need to outrun the bear. And so we need to tell our brain that. And if we name it, we can tame it. So strategy number 1 is to pause and name it. Strategy number 2 is to regulate your autonomic nervous system. And I'm not going to spend much time on this because in the show notes, I've linked an episode about regulating your autonomic nervous system and about going into more detail about amygdala hijack, but giving you a lot of tools. And if you go to the show notes for today's episode at theprivateschoolleader.com/episode 164, that episode will be there, but also you can click on a Google Doc that gives you a bunch of strategies on how to regulate your autonomic nervous system. And it's everything from videos that shows you breathing exercises, articles, strategies, a YouTube video on how to do a thing called the physiological sigh, about how to properly hydrate so that you're not dysregulating your autonomic nervous system, decatastrophizing worksheets because we tend to catastrophize when we're dysregulated. And so all of that is there for you in the show notes, privateschoolleader.com/episode 164. Strategy number 2 is regulate your autonomic nervous system. And then strategy number 3 is to redirect to the process, not the emotion. So we're trying to redirect towards the process and away from emotion. And so when I say process, what I mean is, okay, so we have policies, we have procedures, we have handbooks, and almost all of the conversations that we're having is because a parent is unhappy about, they're unhappy about something, okay? Now, maybe they're there and they're saying, well, the teacher was mean to my kid, okay? That's harder to quantify. And it's the perception of perhaps a 9-year-old and coming home and telling their parents that. So that one's a little more tricky. But a lot of the conversations that we have, our parents are upset about something that they already agreed to not be upset about. They agreed that they're going to, my kid goes to this school. Here's the family handbook. Here's the student handbook. I agree with the things in here. This is part of this is part of the deal. We're here. These are the rules. Okay. You and I both know that's not how it goes down, right? So trying to bring it back to the process. Reminding them what the policy says, not hiding behind policy, but, trying to get back to the process or saying something like, well, here's what we do in situations like this, or let's slow down. Let's slow this conversation down and work through this step by step. And so the word that I have highlighted in my notes is anchor. We need to anchor the conversation to the process. Because if the boat is anchored, it's not going to drift off with the current. And it keeps you from being pulled into this emotional storm on the ocean if you're anchored. And so again, parents often, not always, but often will bring emotion instead of facts. We need to try to get this thing out of the feelings and into the facts to get it back to what are our policies. So let's just say, for an example, that there's a parent that's all upset that their kid is placed in the on-grade level math class, and the end of year assessments and achievement test scores and teacher recommendations there's a process, there's a rubric, there's this whole thing that led to this child being properly placed in the on-grade level 6th grade math class. But the parents are in there. They don't care about the data. They want their kid in the advanced math class, okay? So we have to bring it back to, okay, so we use a rubric and et cetera, okay? So you have your processes. You have your policies and your procedures and your complaint procedure as far as go to this person first, then this person. We have to bring it from, get out of the emotion and redirect it back to the process. Anchor the conversation in the process. So what are the big takeaways from today's episode? Well, we talked about 5 things that can happen if you let a parent hijack your emotions. Number 1, you give in and just to make it stop. Number 2, you say something you regret. Number 3, you get defensive instead of curious. Number 4, you damage trust with your teachers. And number 5, you feel burnout. And then the 3 strategies to use when a parent hijacks your emotions. Number 1, pause and name it. Number 2, regulate your autonomic nervous system. And then strategy number 3 is redirect to process. and away from emotion. And your call to action for today's episode is the next time that you start to feel that rising up in your body is to just pause and to say, I'm safe, or to pause and say, I'm okay, or to pause and say, this is a hijack. Whatever that phrase is can let your amygdala know that you're okay, that you're not in danger, and see if it doesn't make a difference for how you feel in your body. So just a quick reminder that I have one coaching spot open right now, and I'd love to work with you. I'd love to jump on a 20-minute free Zoom call and hear more about your biggest struggle or your biggest goal. Just email me at mark.o.minkus@gmail.com. And another reminder, Parent Academy, theprivateschoolleader.com/Parent Academy. Parents are tough. Sometimes they take up a lot of headspace and they live rent-free in our heads. I want that parent to move out, and I can teach you how to do that in Parent Academy. And then one more thing, a resource, the 7 steps to having successful meetings with upset parents. Check that out at theprivateschoolleader.com/meeting. That's free for you there. And then just a quick reminder that I would really appreciate it if you would share this link to this episode or to the podcast with another school leader in your life or a rising leader at your school. And I've been your host, Mark Minkus. I just want to say I appreciate you so much and all the amazing hard work that you're doing for those lucky kids and lucky teachers at your school. Thank you so much for taking some of your precious time to join me here today. And I'll see you next time right here on the Private School Leader Podcast. And until then, always remember to serve first, lead second, and make a difference.